All right, so today's presentation is, as we've talked about, on migrating self-managed Postgres databases to Amazon RDS for Postgres. So let's go ahead. One of the things we want to talk about are learning objectives for today. So by the end of this session, you should be able to understand some common DBA tasks and how you perform those in RDS. We will talk quite a bit about migration options for the self-managed Postgres to RDS Postgres, and then also give you some best practices for those migration. Okay, there we go. So part of this, the presentation today is we'll be doing a presentation, but we also have a virtual workshop. So there is a link in the Q&A. It's a tiny URL. If you click on that, that will give you lab instructions, so some things that you can do there. You can use your personal ID or like a test AWS account to do this. You can sign in using your IAM user credentials to be able to get to and work with us through the labs. Our walkthrough is going to be based on US West 2, so you'll see that in our region when you pull that down, and I'll show you that. You can choose any region of your choice, though, so it's just we're going to be working in Oregon. So we've got a workshop guide, as I mentioned. There's that tiny URL. And please ask any questions or ask for help in the Q&A. We have some of my very esteemed peers that are in that Q&A and can be answering your questions as they come through. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. Now this is a series of 8 different talks. And so our first talk was on Monday. We spent a lot of time talking about what is RDS and what is that managed database. For those of you who did not or were not able to attend Monday, I've got about 4 or 5 slides that talk about RDS. So we're not going to be going into the detail that we did on Monday, but I want to make sure that you have a really good foundation to start with. Okay. So Amazon RDS is a managed database. So we're working with relational databases in RDS. We have a choice of 6 database engines. I always like to say it's kind of 7 because when we look at the first option here for Amazon Aurora, there is within Aurora, you can use Aurora for Postgres and Aurora for MySQL. We also have the community MySQL, Postgres, which we'll be talking about today, that are RDS Postgres. And then also MariaDB, which is a flavor of MySQL. And of course, we also have SQL Server and Oracle. Some of the things too, and some of the reasons that people go to managed databases is number one, it's a lot easy to administer, right? So you can easily deploy and maintain. One of the things I always like here is that I can learn how to work RDS through the console. And then I can start working with the command line interface and APIs to be able to make it easier for me to install an instance. Okay, so one of the things I worked with quite a bit and spent a lot of my time when I was a DBA is installing that software. And so that makes that a lot easier. And when you do that through the CLI with APIs, you can also put controls around that. So you can put like IAM policies that are associated. So maybe a developer can only install database, like only install RDS Postgres on the smallest instance that's available. So that way you're controlling your costs. Okay. As I just mentioned, secure and compliance, that IAM policy is one of the ways we do that. But we do have encryption. We have encryption through transit, through SSL. We have an entire area on our website that it talks to security. So we won't talk too much on security in this particular presentation, but it's great to know about that and to learn about all the different things that we have. As we say, security is job 1 here at AWS. One of the great things is that it's available and durable when you're talking about instances, and where you can do this at a push button. So I don't have to set up all the software. I don't have to set up monitoring to make sure that the replication lag is there. I already have those that are in CloudWatch, so I can just put an alert on top of that, right? And to set up, again, that availability, I just click a button, and we can see that if we didn't when we're going through the lab. Right? RDS is also performant and very scalable. So I can scale vertically, or as I just mentioned with that high availability, I can scale horizontally as well. And we have different tools that you can look at to help tune your performance on your database, such as CloudWatch, Enhanced Monitoring, and Performance Insights. Okay. There we go. So that just highlighted all of that I was saying. Okay. One of the things that having this relational and this managed database does for you is I kind of started to mention it on the other slides. As a DBA, almost all of my time was taken by doing menial things. Like we need this new installation over here. We need to do disaster recovery testing. We need to set up patching, right? Versus where a lot of my skills were, which was in schema design and query construction and doing architecture. So you can see here when you go to that fully managed system, AWS takes care of a lot of those jobs that are repetitive, such as routine maintenance and installing the software and doing those patching, and it frees up your DBAs to really make a difference in the business and to be able to innovate, doing those type of architecture and maybe even working with new designs that weren't possible before. Okay. So this move to manage relational databases, that manage being RDS, right? Here's a couple of just kind of a wrap up of those slides. So when you move to manage, you're going to reduce database administrative burden, right? There still is need for database DBAs, such as performance tuning, recoverability, things like that. You don't have to re-architect your existing applications to move. But it also, once you get that in the cloud, it allows you to be able to do that on your time scale. And then you can usually get better performance, certainly better availability, scalability, and security, because when you're going to the AWS cloud, we've already set up a lot of those for you. So your security can be push button, and that encryption can be push button. Okay, so you don't have to worry about setting all of that up and controlling all those different certificates like for that SSL. Okay, so you can see here's my managed, I can do, there's my Postgres that we're talking today, and then I can move that into Amazon Aurora, which we won't really hit on a whole lot today, but Amazon RDS for Postgres. Okay, so some of my animation there. Let's talk just briefly about Amazon RDS specifically for Postgres. Okay, so what we do is we take that community version, and then it just gives that ease, put that with that ease of manageability and availability and durability that I just talked about. For RDS, we do support 9.5, 9.6, 10, 11, 12. It's important to note, I'm not sure that I would recommend if you could not go to 9.5, because as we'll see in a couple of slides, Postgres keeps like 5 versions and then it starts deprecating those. So 9.5 is the next one to be deprecated. So it's always good to be on a, like if you can't be on the newest version, try not to be on the oldest version either, because sooner or later you're going to have to upgrade that, probably more sooner than later, right? You can have here, if you notice in our picture, we've got a region, and then we have 2 availability zones. Just to take back here, in AWS, a region means a grouping, physical grouping of data centers or our availability zones. And then an availability zone is a logical grouping of data centers. Okay, so you can see here one availability zone where we can, we put those in different like floodplains. So if there's a flood and it affects one availability zone, it won't affect that second availability zone. So even just using different availability zones gives you high availability, right? But if you do need that region, you can certainly go cross region to set this up. In this particular case, I'm just looking at that across availability zones. So in this particular case, this is something called multi-AZ, and we talked about that on Monday, where I have a primary in one availability zone that's open, and then I have a standby that's only there for failover, okay? But the good thing about this setup is that I can take backups against my standby, right? So when I'm doing the backup in the snapshot, I don't have to affect the primary when I'm doing that, although that's still very, very, you're not going to notice any performance hit from that. So I talked about this here in region. It's very close with the community version. So RDS right now does support Postgres 12. Okay. And it is available in a lot of instance classes, including that you can go down to very small sizes just for that development, to be able to work with that and to have a smaller size when I'm just playing around and trying to test things out. Okay, so common DBA tasks that we talk about, right? One of the common or very common thing that I have to look at is, as we talked about, where my time is spent. Okay? So on premise, I'm spending a lot of time on platform, whether it's me or whether it's my sysadmin, that when I need something new, they have to create a Stripe or they have to create a new box for me to work. So a lot of that platform, not only with installing the database, it also works with installing the hardware and how much time is spent there. I spend a lot of time on access, probably more time than I ever wanted to. I always was trying to find a way to have our NOC create access for us. So access is a lot of time that I'm spent. Monitoring, certainly, especially those fires, fighting fires. So if something is all of a sudden running slow, I'm spending a lot of time on my monitoring. And then it's database and applications, right? Or that inventive and innovative things that I can do. And when you go to RDS, I kind of flip that around. So I'm not spending hardly any time on those platform things that I used to, but I'm spending a lot more time on innovating and making my application run faster and possibly even doing different things like finding the right sizing for different SQL statements or different applications that I'm running. Okay, so one of the very common, right, things that I have to do as a DBA is I have to work with a PostgreSQL conf, right, if I'm on premise. So from my community edition, that's what CE means, community edition. I have a file-based configuration, right, that Postgres SQL conf. And I have dynamic and I have static parameters within that. But I have one location where that's at, and then I modify it. So there might be a place that I keep all of those different settings in those parameter configuration settings so that if I install a new instance, I can somewhat or copy in the things that I need and maybe change one or two things. So one of the things that you get as a benefit by moving to RDS is that you have something called parameter groups. So again, we've talked about you don't really have that shell access when you go to that managed database. So you don't have the PostgreSQL conf. You have the parameter groups. So it's a centralized area to manage that. Each major version has its own parameter group that you can modify and you can customize. All right. So what you can do is I can say, hey, I'm going to set up one particular custom parameter group. Maybe I always want to have a work mem set to a certain size, right, for production, let's just say. So I can change that, and we'll see that in our workshop here coming up. I can change that, and then what I can do is I can associate that with an instance, with one of those database instances. So I'm not having as much management and, oh, is this the one for prod, or is this the one for test, or do I have to redo everything, and which one's default? I can take that custom parameter group and say, well, most of my production systems are going to be sized, are going to have durability the same. So I'm just going to associate that custom parameter group, maybe I'll call it prod, with those databases. So then I've got control over it. Then I know it's not changing, and I can actually look and see if I can compare them to see if something is different. Okay, and we'll look at that here in a second. Oop, back one. You can see how close we are. So managing those parameter groups. So again, I've got the parameter. It is on an instance, so I have to associate a parameter group to an instance, right? I do have dynamic or static. So the dynamic is what you're used to now. It means I can make that change and I don't need to have a bounce. Static means I've got to have that reboot. I can have, it will tell me if it's modifiable. So this is a little bit different. If it's true, then it means that I can modify that in RDS. If it's false, it's just showing you informationally what it is, but you can't modify it in RDS. Okay. Then there's also an option for default value. So if you see this and it's blank, it doesn't mean that it's not being used. It means it's taking the default from Postgres, okay? And it's just that default. That's all it means. you can have a default value of a formula. And what that means is that depending on your instance class that you're on, the instance size that you're on, these parameters are calculated based on that. So you're going to have a formula that you see there. Okay. And then, of course, there's an explicit value. You know, if I set something to 50, like for work mem, or I set it to 100, or parallel processes or something like that, that's got that value. Okay. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. If I could switch to share my screen here. All right. Let's take 1 second for this to come up. All right, so there's my console. I'm just going to minimize so you guys don't see that black mark right there. So this is our lab. So if you download that lab, you're going to see the same document that I'm showing you right now. Just to go through a couple of things at the beginning here, there are some prerequisites as we talked about. You need that AWS account, right? That either is your personal account or something that you have like through your company. All right. Again, our walkthrough is going to be down on Oregon too. You can use whatever region that you want to. We're going to leverage the default PC, so you'll see different places where that's set up. It just makes it easier when we're trying to connect and using different security groups among the different values, whether it's DMS or RDS that we're looking at. Okay, you can configure the AWS CLI to what I've got in this document is I have some CLI commands, so if you want to play around with it. But on purpose, since on Monday, we actually worked quite a bit with the CLI, I kind of flipped that this time. And we're going to do a lot of work through the console, just so that you see the difference, and also to kind of back up what I've said before, which is, hey, if you're new, it's sometimes good to look at the console before you jump right into the command line interface. Okay. In here, if you continue going down, you'll see that we've got some useful resources there. How you launch an EC2 instance, right? How you set up Cloud9, which is really good. I'll just show you a little bit of that. We're not going to go into that as much, but you can do that to SSH into your instance. And then, of course, creating that instance and connecting to a Postgres instance. So we've got those links here in case you want to look at those afterwards. So what we'll be doing with this lab is I'll be walking through some of this lab with you. And so please feel free to follow along, ask questions. But if it's something that you can't follow along for whatever reason, you've got this lab document that you can use later on, and you can, like later on tonight or tomorrow, and play around with it and follow through the lab. Okay? All right. So as far as this installing Postgres SQL client tools, let me show you here. So one of the things that you can do is you can install Cloud9, which is an IDE, as I talked about, right? So you can see here, this is my SSH. If we go up to the top, one of the commands that we have in some of our labs, go all the way up to the top. I didn't query on one thing particular. And what I did was I just ran to see what are the instances that are in here, okay? So you can see, you know, what our AWS RDS describe DB instance. So in my region, it's going to show me all of the instances that I've created. That's some of the things that you can do when you're working through this. To install Cloud9, I'll just show you through here. You can click on AWS. You'll see Cloud9 shows up because I've been working on it, but all you have to do here is do Cloud9 and spell it correctly. That helps. Okay. You click there, and it'll take me to this. You can see I've got one right here called KG Lab, but really all you do is create your environment. You can give it a name. I'm not going to save this, so we'll just call it test, and then we'll call it test, right? I'm going to go to my next steps down here, right? Create a new instance. That's how I usually work it. And then I create my instance type as a small instance type. I usually don't do a whole lot of work with this, so a smaller instance type you can usually get away with. It depends on what you're doing. Are you writing huge commands? Okay, so we'll stay there. I usually stick with Linux, but certainly Ubuntu, you can select that. Cost savings just means that it's going to hibernate after this amount of time. So if you're only running a couple commands, 30 minutes is fine. If you're working all day, then you can say after a day and it'll hibernate. And if you, just in case you forget, you're going to save costs because it'll automatically hibernate. It does have an IAM role associated with it. You don't have to do anything with that. That'll just default in there. Again, here's my default VPC that I would use. Subnet, I'm not going to do anything with it, and I can add a tag with that. So I can say for this particular tag, it's lab, and it's RDS labs, let's just say, okay. Next step, it just is going through, this is what we have, and then you would click on create environment. So it doesn't take very long to do that, but as you saw, when I click on open IDE, it gives me that shell, right? So I can run those CLI commands and I can see what's going on in my system. You can also run from the lab. You'll see here a couple. This here is just installing. You would do this when you first create it to put those Postgres clients in there. But here's some of the commands, right? So I'm going to show you how to do this on the console, but here we're creating a parameter group, right? You're doing the same thing. So if you feel like following the commands in the lab, that's how you would do that. Okay, so let's go ahead, go back to my screen, go back to my, I'm going to close this one, and then click here. And I'm going to go to RDS again. I've been using it, but if I just do RDS, that's going to show easy way to get there. Okay. So if you look here when I bring up the console, on the left-hand side, you're going to see parameter groups and option groups. Okay. We're working with parameter groups because, again, that's what we're going to change one of those parameters. And you can see through here that I have a lot of those defaults for that major version. Okay. So what I do with this is I'm going to create a parameter group. That's my first step. I'm going to choose which family this is for. Let's just say we're going to go with Postgres and 10. Okay. Be careful, Aurora and then just Postgres. Those are two different parameter groups. Okay. So I'm going to say this is for my RDS lab test. And say, you know, test parameter group. Okay, put the P on there. Create. Right. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm creating that custom parameter group. All right. Then I'm going to go through here and look. Remember, I called it here. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Now I have to find my, where I did it. We're just going to go to this one here since I'm having trouble scrolling down. Okay, so this is my custom. The next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to edit the parameters because I want to change, whoop, hold on. I know what's going on. It's because I have this large enough so you all can see, which is a really good thing, but in some cases it makes it a little difficult. So let's go back to custom parameter group there. I'm going to go back to my, we're just going to say that custom and click it. And then I'm going to edit. Okay. Because I want to edit, I want to add parameters to my custom group. Now what I can do here is I can just say work, say workmem, right? And so I can see that I can change that. Let's say I just want to change it to 100, right? So I can then save changes. I can also go in and I can go back to that, or I can click here and say, yeah, let's do, yeah, I think we're fine there. I think that we can just go through one and not one, two. You can see here the different things where I look at, but what I would do is now I've saved my changes, right? The next thing I'm going to do here is now that I've created my custom parameter group, I want to associate it with one of my databases. Okay, so I'm going to click over here on database, and I'm going to click over to KG demo. All right, so I'm going to click there. Now we can see on configuration, I think that I chose configuration. My 10.7. Right. So I'm on 10.7. You can see in recommendations, we didn't talk too much about that. Right. So what I can do here is I can click on modify. And it'll give me many things that I can modify, right? I can go through here. We'll talk about upgrading here in a second. But one of the things I can also do is I can choose that parameter group. So down here in database options, I've got that default, and I can say, in this particular case, we'll just choose one particular parameter group that I want to change it to. Okay. So once I do that, and then most important is this here. So scheduling of modifications. So I can do one of two things. I can schedule this to run during my next scheduled window, which means it doesn't bounce now, it will bounce during my next window that I've created. Or I can say apply immediately. So it depends on what you're doing, on which ones that you want to set up. As an old DBA, I would always make the change and then apply immediately during a window so that I had control if there was going to be a static change and it was going to bounce. So in that particular case, that's what I'm going to do here, is I'm going to apply immediately. Now remember, we didn't look to see, but if this was something that was dynamic, then I wouldn't bounce. If it's something that's static, then I would bounce, right? So I can go over here back to parameter groups. And I can say, yes.
Question here. So
yeah.
when the parameter group, so does it require a reboot for the new
right, so that's a great question. It was kind of exactly what I was going to go to answer, so that's good. It depends on what you're changing. If you're changing a dynamic parameter or you're changing a static. Anything that's static requires a bounce, but if it's dynamic, just like it would be for Postgres, then that's not going to require a bounce. So it depends on what you're changing. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and go back here as we associated that parameter group. And let's go back to, let's see here. Yeah, let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation. So we can see here in databases, right, as far as my KG demo, this one here is modifying. So that particular that I wanted to do, that there's a modification that's going on with it. So when we come back to the labs, then I'll show you that it has that different parameter group. Okay, or come back from the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so let's go ahead and go back to that presentation. So this one here, this next part of the presentation is pretty quick. We'll go back to the labs fairly quickly here when we're looking. Okay, so there was our lab 1. Let's go through. So we kind of talked about versioning a little bit. Let me take a drink here. Don't lose my voice too much. So for RDS Postgres, there are a couple different types of versioning, right? The first is your minor version, and the second is your major version. So a minor version would be like it shows on the slide here, that if I've got 9.68 and I want to go to 9.612, those are minor versions, right? They're still within the same major version. They're just like point releases, okay? A major version is, okay, I've gone to that 9.6.12 and now I want to go to 10, right, a 10.7. That's a major jump. Okay. So minor versions is approximately every 3 months. I have seen a couple come out within that 3 months. Major versions are going to come out once a year. So I have somebody that's off of mute. Was there a question? Okay, no. Thank you. Okay, thank you. All right, so major versions of once a year. As I mentioned on that previous slide, the end of life is going to happen 5 years after the initial release. So there is a new version every year. So that's why when we go to 12, then the last one drops off at 9.5. Or 13, the last one drops off. Okay. So RDS supports Postgres, as we talked about. It does right now. We do support 9.5, but again, I'm not sure, unless there's a real compelling reason to go there, I would not go there. I would go 9.6, or I would really look at 11 or above. But 9.6, 10, 11, or 12, right? In Postgres 12, we got declarative partitioning, which is a lot better than it was in 9.6 if you ever tried to partition using triggers. Postgres 11 I love, especially as being a former DBA in Oracle. It just makes partitioning so much easier, right, that I can swap in partitions, right? So there's a lot of things you can do around partitioning in 11, and I really recommend it that that's the earliest version that you go to. Big fan of that one. And then Postgres 12, it has generated column, but it also has other fixes such as JSON query language. It has some fixes to parallelism and to partitioning as well. Okay, so definitely, as expected, the newer versions have a lot of great bells and whistles and things that you can really use, especially around like performance tuning, the parallelism, and the partitioning. Okay. All right. Right. So let's talk a little bit about that minor version upgrade. Okay. What I can do, the process itself typically takes about 5 to 10 minutes. All right. It does shut down the instance. So that is a downtime when you do a minor upgrade. You're going to shut down the instance and it replaces those binaries, and then it will start back up the instance. But it does this for you. You don't have to worry about downloading the files and running a PG upgrade or anything like that. RDS is going to take care of that for you. Okay. Now, this is where it can be done manually or automatically as well. So I can make a checkbox, as I was mentioning before. When I install, or I can modify, and I can say, I want it to always apply a minor version. Okay. And what that does, we'll see on the next slide how that works. So let me go there. Okay, so this is that auto minor version upgrade, if you can see here. Here, this is where it is. It's set, I think right there. It's really small for me in my particular window. So what it does is it will say, all right, when the next time I get a point release, an upgraded point release, and if that is set to a preferred version, then as soon as it's set to preferred, next time you go to your maintenance window, it will automatically upgrade you to this preferred minor version. Okay, so again, what does that do to you as far as production? I'm not sure. I think I would, again, this is just me being an old paranoid DBA. If it's development, I totally see where you can have it automatically done, especially on particular development systems. Maybe I want to constantly have it at the latest point release to see, like, to do a comparison or QA comparison. If it's running this way in my one QA, how's it running in my latest point release? You know, an example like that. In production, I want to have control over that. So again, I may plan that out. I may test that, certainly, definitely test it from dev to test to QA to stage. And then when I've got my downtime in production, then I would just apply this. So that's having the auto minor version that's turned on. Okay. Again, remember that's about 5 to 10 minutes that it would run. The major version upgrade is not going to happen automatically. The only time that would happen for you is if there was a deprecated version. And so at some point, we have to end that. So let's say support for 9.3 or 9.4. At some point, if you're on that version, we have to upgrade you, right? Because that's deprecated by the community. So after many emails and a lot of conversation, and it doesn't happen automatically, there's a chance that you could get automatically upgraded to a newer major version. That's the only scenario that I know of. Otherwise, if you do a major version upgrade, that is on you to do, to schedule that, to test that, and to ultimately provision as far as say, okay, I want to upgrade at this time. All right. There are, yeah, we'll go there. So I can go 9.6 to 10, and I can just do a drop down, and we'll see that when we go into the lab and say, okay, I want to upgrade to this particular version. The last point is really what I would consider obvious, but it's something that I feel like I say every single time that I talk to customers, is that please, please, please test. Right? More than likely, you're not going to have a major issue. Postgres is very good about upgrades, unlike some of the other databases that I talked about that I've worked with. It's very safe in most cases, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to test. You want to make sure that you test the timing, right, if anything. Okay. All right, so let's click here. Okay, so you can see here, what you can do, there are a couple ways that you can play around with upgrades a little bit. So you can have a read replica, and you can have that read replica on a different version, right? What you can do then is you can stop working on what was the primary. You can promote the replica, and then you can switch all of your connections over to what is now the promoted replica or is actually production. Okay. It's going to have a lot less downtime if you do that. You're just waiting to drain off connections. Okay. One of the things you do want to do is you want to enable backups once you do that. But the other thing, I mean, this says it here, before I do anything, I want to take a backup, right? Okay. The time to upgrade and how long it takes to do a major upgrade is really dependent on like the system tables, right? So how many tables I have, it's more that than the amount of data. So you could have a database that is 900 gig and a database that's 2 terabyte. And in some cases, the 2 terabyte would upgrade before the 900 gig. So it just depends on the number of tables that you have in those system catalogs. Okay, that's the most, that's something to look at. It depends on other things too, but that's the major thing. Okay. So let's go ahead and go into that lab. Go back to.
Kathy, while you are in the process of opening console, I have a question. You talked about minor version upgrade. Is it possible we can choose our own maintenance window, or it is something AWS fix the maintenance window?
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary. So you can choose when your maintenance window happens. Now, it will default if you don't change it. So that's a very important thing, and you can modify it. But you can change if it's 2 in the morning or if it's midnight. Certainly during production, you don't want to have it during the day. But yes, you can change that. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to that lab. So I'll show you what we'll kind of go through. We're just looking at this here. What we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to, where it is automated, that you can do a minor version upgrade, as well as how you perform that minor version upgrade. Okay, so we'll go back over here to our screen, to our console, and I'm going to go into my databases. I guess I'm going to go right back into that KG demo, right? Because we know that KG demo is version 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to upgrade it to a higher point release, right? So all I did was I clicked on modify, and then it's going to bring up those different modifications, and I'll show you where you can change not only to allow that automated minor version upgrade, but also change that maintenance window at the same time, okay? So you can see here, I'm on 10.7 with this Postgres version. My multi-AZ, I have that turned on, right? Automatic scaling, we can go in here. That's where I change my master password as well. Right, I've got all of these. I'm not going to change any of these here. I'm going to just go into, there's my backup when I want to run my backup. My log export, I certainly want to have that. Here is my maintenance. Okay, so when I created this, I set that automatic minor version upgrade on. So if there was a new release and I had this here, the next time and it would be Monday at 11:52 UTC. So again, I can change this, right? This isn't going to help me a lot as far as where I'm at. So I might want to set this to say 4 in the morning. I think UTC is 6 or 7 hours from where I'm at. So that would give me enough time. So I can set that there as well. Okay. Then what I can do, so I'm going to go back up here because we kind of just skipped through that. And this is where I change my minor version. So I wanted to show you all of that before I got in here. So again, I'm on 10.7 right now. Let's say I just want to go to 10.11. Okay. So I've chosen that. And again, what am I going to do? I'm going to go back down here that I already was at. And I'm going to click on continue. Now again, super important thing there is that I want to apply immediately with what we're doing here. Just as a note, you can see the things that I'm modifying up here. So I'm going to change the engine version and the maintenance window. So I always look there before I do anything, because that way I can see, oh no, I didn't want to do that, right? So then I can go backwards and not make those changes. So I can say cancel. In this case, we want to modify the database. Okay. So when I click on that modify, it will take me back to that console, or that, since I was in databases. And then let's just look at it in this particular format where I'm looking here. So in Patient DBA, I can sit here and just refresh and refresh and refresh. Here is where I can see what's going on in my system, right? So it takes a second to go through and change that. But now we see upgrading, right? So if I wanted to, you can see same way, right? If I wanted to come over here and I wanted to take PG demo and I wanted to modify that because I wanted to go to a particular version, we'll click on modify, and then I can come in here and I can say, all right, I want to go from 11.8 to 12.3. Okay. The process is the same through here. I would go all the way down. If I wanted to change anything else, I would click on continue, and then I can go into that apply immediately. Okay. But we'll notice when we come back and we look at things that this is going to take longer than just that minor version, which is about 5 to 10 minutes on the minor. Okay. So we'll go ahead and click that and make that change. Okay, so pretty straightforward as far as upgrading. The thing that makes it complicated is just the testing, making sure that you've done the right type of testing, make sure that you are looking at the timing around things, and that not only that, but you've done like a performance test just to make sure everything still works. Okay, so we'll come back and we can look at that there. All right, and I'm both upgrading. Okay, that was a quick lab.
So
Yeah, go for it.
To Kathy's point, when for both minor versions and major version upgrades, an easier approach is you can take a snapshot of your current database, restore it, and test the upgrades by having your application doing some testing on top of that. Then you can plan your production implementation.
Yeah, so many ways that you can work that, right? Especially if you do a snapshot to dev. I would say at some point in QA or stage, you want to do the upgrade, the process, just so you can get timing down. But yeah, all kinds of different ways that you can work that. Thanks, Gary. Okay, so let's go back to our slides and get into migration. Okay, so this is going to be the majority of the rest of our conversation is going to be working in migration, especially with DMS or Database Migration Service, although we've got a couple other things in here you can do besides that. Okay, so how can you migrate? A couple options, right? Number one, you can just use a PG dump and PG restore, or you can use PG dump, and if the file is open, you can run all of those SQL statements, right? You can use our Database Migration Service. You can actually use PG Logical as an extension, or you can use that logical, that pub sub, okay, using especially replication slots or using that different publication and subscription model that you have. So we'll go into these a little bit more, dive in a little deeper. So PG down, it's the simple option, right? It's going to be at a point. So it's not great for like if I need point-in-time recovery or I need to have change data capture. We do have customers that use both. They'll do a PG dump and then put DMS and have DMS do the change data capture. The good thing about the PG dump is that it supports all of the major versions and different OS as well if you're going to that. And again, it may not be suitable for 24/7 because you are going to have a bit, if you're really just going to only use PG dump, you'll have a delay from when you took that consistent backup to when you can bring everything back up. In some cases, that works great. You may have a weekend downtime. If you have that, I'd recommend PG dump. We'll talk about that in best practices. But it's the native tool, and so you know that it's going to move everything. Okay, PG dump, restore to Amazon RDS. Some people may say, well, how do you do that? We've got some documents in the lab, but you can do a PG dump. If you're going to do the file, you can move the file to S3, right? So you can have that. There's a way to have do that and a lot of documentation around that. You can also run a PG dump, and as I said, if it's open, if it's default, then you can just take all of the contents and run those SQL statements within your RDS Postgres. Okay. All right. Okay, so again, I kind of talked about this. What we recommend, when you can, you do it. Again, it's just native. So it's going to be something that's been in Postgres, and you know that that's going to work all the time. Certainly homogeneous, Postgres to Postgres, right, when you're doing that. If you're migrating an entire database, it's always nice to do. And if you don't have a restriction on downtime, right, that's one of the other big reasons that you would use PG dump. Okay, so how about migrating versus DMS? So I've got some high-level slides, and then we'll continue to dive down into this deeper. So you might see that just as a warning there. So my DMS overview, it's really simple to use, okay? You can set it up to have very minimal downtime. Show you a couple things with that. It supports many different types of engines, many types of databases. It's low cost. I'll show you, I've got a slide here that tells you a little bit about that, gives you an idea. It's fast and easy to set up, and it's reliable, and it can restart. So when you get it, not only is it reliable that it shouldn't stop, if it does stop, you can restart from that point. Okay. So how's it simple to use? You have no drivers or no applications to install. So it's not a separate product that you have to go and install on your source. The only thing you might have to do is it uses, particular connections. If you don't have Java, it usually is using a JDBC. If you want SSL, you have to, have a certificate, things like that. But it's not an additional software that is doing things on your production database. Okay. There's really no changes to the source in most cases. There's some prerequisites that hopefully make sense as far as that I have to turn things on to make sure we're capturing enough information in the logs, right? Things like that would be changes that you have to make. You'll see it's just a few clicks to start a migration from the console. So I'll show you that here in a couple when we do that lab. It manages the complexities of that migration for you. And again, we'll see some of that, different things that I can do with DMS that is just through, you can certainly do the API, but through the console, it makes it really easy through UI. Right? It will automatically replicate the changes if you set it up for change data capture. And it can be used not only for change data capture for a minute, but you can do continuous replication. So before we had cross-region, I had customers that used DMS for cross-region replication. Okay. Okay. So let's click there. Okay. So on your source, you can have all the changes replicated over to your target, right? And then the target will stay in sync because we've got, an option to turn on change data capture. And it can stay in sync for as long as you choose. I think this is great for tuning, for like that testing. So I can set up DMS on the source and target. I can create my target and I can do all my testing to make sure that my performance is where I expect it to be. Okay. And then maybe I reset up, I start over again, kind of trash it, start over, and then I can cut over for production. Okay. The source again is going to remain fully operational until you take it down. So you still have the applications that are going to the source for your before you migrate. And then what happens is that I decide when I switch over, so I can shut down the application, wait for those connections to drain on my source, recreate that or point the application to the target or the new source, and then those application or connections will just be connected to the target. Okay. All right, it supports a lot of databases, so I won't go through these individually, but you can see here as far as sources and targets, and we're always adding new, always looking for reasons to add new. Okay. All right. Low cost I mentioned, you can see here there are different DMS, those migration server, different sizes that you can use. So you can see here an hourly rate when you're using a small, just to test, is when you do that. For 2 weeks, it's going to be about $12. Okay. So you can migrate a 1 terabyte database for under $65. Okay, so it's really cost effective. And this is even when you're talking C4 large. Depending, and we'll talk about this, you may want to, when you do that full load, you may want this size to be larger, but then when you're done with the full load, you can bring that instance size down. Okay, all right. So it's easy to set up. So migration task is kind of where everything starts. So what you do is you'll first set up, you'll connect to the source database, you'll connect to the target database, those are endpoints. I'm going to create my replication instance, that's my DMS instance, and then I'll create a task and run a task. So at a high level, that's what I'm doing. You can run multiple tasks within DMS for settings for different environments or even at times the same environment. Okay. As I mentioned here, it is highly resilient and self-healing. You can set up monitoring on DMS so you can have things go to CloudWatch and you can publish it to your logs to CloudWatch so I can get alerted if something's running, say, overnight. Okay. In case of that interruption, it will automatically restart with the process. Okay. And you can set it up for multi-AZ. So if there's a problem here, I can fail over my DMS instance. Okay. Really nice, especially if I'm working in prod and I've got that continual replication. Okay, so what are some of the components when we look at that? We'll go through these individually. So that replication instance we kind of talked about, right? I've got a dedicated EC2 instance for DMS, or my replication instance. For testing, I would do a T. For full load, you're going to do that C class. And then my CDC is usually an R class. Now these are rule of thumb best practices. If you have things that are very memory intensive or you have things that are CPU intensive, you may want to play with those some. Okay. You can have public or private IP within the VPC, right? And what happens at task execution, it's going to move source to target, but you can have multiple tasks, as we talked about. Okay. So my endpoint, right? The endpoint is going to be the source or target. You set up the endpoint type, the name, the identifier, the engine, right? You can set up advanced attributes with my endpoint. So I can have my key management service, that KMS key that will help me with encryption. Always test, or at least, I mean, you want to, before you run it, at least test the endpoint and make sure that it connects, right? Sorry, I'm chugging water there. There's fires here in Colorado. So let's talk about your task. Okay, so I'm not going to go under each of these. I got some slides that are coming up. So with your task, I'm going to name it. I'm going to connect to my endpoints. I'm going to choose my migration type, prep, like what am I going to do, and if I'm including lobs. So DMS does work with lobs, but there's some things that you want to do that will help make it faster and more efficient. Okay, so diving in deeper to that, I want to choose my migration type. I can choose existing data, right? I can choose, and that's just going to be my full load. I can choose existing data and replicate changes. So that's, I'm going to do a full load, and then when I'm done, keep it open and do any replication of changes. And then I can do the CDC only. So I've done the full and I want to come back and do the change data capture. Okay. Target prep, what I can do on the target is I can say do nothing. I can say drop the tables as part of this. So if the tables already exist, drop them. Or I could truncate it. Okay. Depends on what I'm doing, on which ones I want to work with that. Lobs. Lobs can be very slow if you don't work around them. So limited lob mode is usually the fastest. I can put a max lob size on it. Full lob mode is going to move everything, but it's just slower. Okay. All right. So tasks are those work hosts of the migration, and you can run in parallel when you're running them. So you can have parallel tasks that are doing your work where it makes sense. And you can use JSON to set those up. That'll give you control over, say, performance and debugging. Okay, so let's talk about, not backwards, migration scenarios, right? So there's a tool that we haven't talked about because not many people use it when you're doing homogeneous. You can, but there's a tool that's part of DMS. It's called Schema Conversion Tool. So we just wanted to leave this in there just so you're aware of it, especially if you're going heterogeneous, like Oracle to Postgres, you'd want to start with SCT. It's a free tool that you download, and so you can run reports without connecting to the system. Okay, so when do I use DMS alone? A lot of times in that homogeneous, right? DMS is going to create tables using drop tables on target. Okay, SCT and DMS together, if you use SCT, what it will do is it will create all your objects and do a conversion. So again, like Oracle to Postgres, it'll convert where needed. And then you load using DMS. Okay. And then, of course, as I mentioned, you can use native tools like pgdump and then come in and use DMS afterwards to do that change data capture. Okay. Okay. So here's kind of a migration flow, and then we'll go into, real quick, go through a couple slides. All right, so we can see here's my Postgres. Right, this is my on-premise database, so my application user. Here is my network to AWS Cloud, so VPN, and this is my RDS instance. Okay. There we go. So I start that replication instance, so I've created one. I connect the source and target through endpoints. I'm going to select which table schemas or databases that I want to move. I can select all or have a subset. I let the DMS service create those tables and load them, and then change data capture to keep them in sync. Okay. Then those application users are going to go to my new instance once I've done all of that work. And now I've migrated. Okay. So here's another way to look at some of those options. Right? So I have a source and a target in my replication instance. Okay. So when I'm loading the data, I do capture the changes at that time, but I don't apply them until the full load is done. So that's what those are saying. Full load's done, I'm going to apply my CDC. Okay. Changes reach that ready state, my application is stopped. Then I move the data to the target. Okay. When I'm loading in DMS, it's table by table. That's why I can do parallelism. Okay. So I'm loading those individual tables. That allows me to do a couple of things. First of all, changes are transactionals from the database logs. That's why I don't need an agent. Right. So I can capture the information on the logs. It goes through the rep server, and then I capture them on the target. Okay, so CDC is no touch. It'll start reading the recovery log. So when something goes to the recovery log, that's when it's going to do that. So it's going to, again, the change data versus an API. No agent required, as we talked about. It captures the transactions and applies them in order. And it can be activated when the load starts, right? Changes are applied after the initial load, so the full load happens and then the changes happen after that. Okay. I'm going to go through these here. There are a couple of things. Remember I said that you might have to change some things on the database, but they're more just parameters. So we have a document that talks about this, but these are a couple. You've got to change the wall level to logical, right? A couple of things you need to do in the parameters to have this work. So the parameter group, or if you're going RDS or PGSQL. So one of the things that's nice about DMS is I can take one database, I can actually use DMS to split it out. So by users or by schemas or by tables, I can split that out. Okay. Same thing. I can go from multiple sources into one database instance. And DMS will help me do that. I don't have to code or do anything. I can also do multiple sources and multiple targets. Just makes things easier when if I'm compiling or I need to move things. I also don't have to take everything. So if I have a huge instance that's, 10 terabyte, but I want to save off, I only want to move things that have a date that's bigger or smaller than 90 days ago, right? I can do that and keep everything in that database, move off the new stuff, and then move the old data to maybe S3 and use Athena to report on it, or Redshift, right? We talked about this. I can go Oracle, Postgres, SQL Server, MySQL. I can do homogeneous or heterogeneous. Okay. There are some limits to DMS. Once you start getting, 5 to 7 terabytes, then we might want to talk and we might want to do a full dump and then do those change data capture. It's just a network thing. Sometimes it just takes too long, and I'm keeping those walls for too long. Okay. Some configuration tips. Always enable CloudWatch logs. It's not enabled by default, and I'll show you that. Choose your log mode carefully. I would reach out and ask people what are the best scenarios if you have logs. It'll move it. It's just there are some ways that you can make it a lot faster. Replication instance security group. Use default for the VPC. Okay. There are extra connection attributes. Keep that in mind as far as if I want to do KMS. There are transformation rules for changing cases, for changing and doing things differently. Okay. On the source, we've got some Oracle stuff. We can kind of look through that. But the unsupported data types, that's one of the things for Oracle. You can use a read replica or standby in situations. Okay. Performance tips. This is the number one that I talked about. The DMS instance size makes a difference. So it's okay to use a T2 small if I'm testing, but if I'm moving for migration, I never want to use a T instance. I want to use a C or an R, and I want to look at the sizes, okay, because that's one of the things that will affect the migration's performance more than anything. That along with what's my network throughput, okay. I can split a load, as I mentioned, within different tasks. So if I'm going from a partition table, might be a way to look at that. And reduce contention on my target. So if I first set up my target, don't turn on replication or multi-AZ. Do that after I've replicated, right? That's going to help me with performance. Turn off logging is another thing that we can do to help that performance. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the rest of that demo. So I'll talk through what I've done. So to kind of make it look like I'm going from on-premise to not, what I did is I created, I'll just show you in here, I created my EC2 instance. What I did was I just chose Ubuntu and installed it in an EC2 instance. Okay, I know that I did that because I know that Ubuntu automatically comes with Postgres clients. Just make it easier for me to do that. Okay, so I used my public DNS. You can see here what I did was I used, if I can find it on my screen, hopefully it's not like that. It totally is like that. We will go into, I thought I changed this, so I apologize. Going into colors, make my foreground black so you can see that. Okay, so I went into PuTTY. You can see here it's inactive, but I created my Postgres instance. If it lets me. This is the one we want to go to probably. Okay, Ubuntu. And I'm just going to go sudo. Go to Postgres. And then go to pSQL. This was the other PuTTY that I was on. So you can see here, if I just do like tables, right? I have a bunch of tables in there, the different sports, right, that I can look at. Oops. Right, I can see the only databases that I have in here are, I just have Postgres. Right, so I loaded everything into Postgres. Right, so I've got my endpoints that are set up for that. The other instance that I created is I did create an RDS instance. This time I'm just going to choose it there. Sorry about that. Okay, so it's called prod target. Right. So I created this one. You can see it's a T2 small that I created. Now I'm going to go to my database migration service. Okay. So the first thing that you want to do, or what I usually do, you can create the endpoints or you can create the replication instance. I found sometimes it takes longer to create the replication instance, so that's where I start, but it doesn't matter. You can do either one. So I've already got one out here, but I'm going to show you how you create this replication instance. So again, I'd say test RD lab, right? We'll just say test. I can choose my size. This is for my DMS instance again. So I'm testing so I can use T, but again, when I go production, I want to use maybe a C4 2XL, depending on the data that I want to change. So we'll do that. We'll go with the latest version here, 333. I'm going to keep it at 50, but you can do whatever. VPC, again, through the lab, we're going to choose default, which is actually that one for me. That's actually my default VPC. If I want to set it up to be multi-AZ here, and again, this is the DMS instance, I can do that. I can make it publicly accessible, and then you can go in here and see different things, right? What is my availability zone? What's my security group? I'm going to use default, right? Encryption. It has maintenance as well. It's an instance that we need to provide maintenance on. Minor version upgrade, right? I might want to say yes or no. And then I can apply tags. And then I would just click on create. Okay, so it takes a little bit of time, not crazy, about 10 minutes to create that. And so when I'm waiting to create that, I go into endpoints, okay? So you can see I've got my source and target. Right here is my source, and this is my target. For my work, you can see they're both Postgres. So if I click on create endpoint, you'll see I start with a source, right? What's my endpoint identifier? Test. What's my engine? Again, be careful here. We don't want to use Aurora Postgres. We're actually going to just go into Postgres, right? My source. I can say my server name, my port, 3232, right? My username, my password, my database name. If I want something extra to connection attribute, like an SSL could be there. If I'm using a master key, and then I can test my endpoint. Okay, once we do that, we create it. That happens very quickly. My next one that I set up is going to be my target. So what's nice about this is if I'm going into RDS, all I have to do is click here to select RDS instance, and I can select one of my instances and it populates. So it knows more about that instance of what is happening, you know, how it's set up. So in this case, I can say, well, I want to use per target, right? So you can see it fills out that engine. I've got my name, master user. I know that's the admin user. And then I just have to put in the password, okay? And then create that. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here to migration tasks. I'm going to go in and create my task, and it's going to tell me what I want to do. So again, test, my replication, endpoint, and this is the big one. Do I want to just do the full? Do I want to do full and CDC? Or do I want to just do the CDC? Okay. We've got our task settings, which we talked about. Am I going to do nothing, drop the tables, or truncate? Logs. If I don't have to worry about it, I can just keep that default. You can enable validation, which it will say from the source and the target if there are rows that drop out, or if, like I'm looking at prod and I'm looking at the source and they don't match. You would see that here in this validation log. So I can turn that on. I definitely want to turn on CloudWatch. This here, this is more messaging, so I'm not going to fill that out a whole lot, especially in the beginning. The next step I go to is advanced task settings, right? And then I can go into tags, okay? All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the dashboard, not highlight it, right? I'm going to go into my database migration task, and I'm going to show you this particular task. This is the one I just did. This is set up for replication ongoing, okay? I can see my table statistics. So you can see here where those tables were moved. Oh, sorry, I have this black box there. Okay. I can see different migration that happened. Right. So everything that's going down here. Not a lot of rows on these top ones. Okay. I can look at my CloudWatch metrics when that was happening, and I can see what's happening with the load. Right at this time, it's 3 hours. We could look 12 hours and look to see. Okay. So one of the things, yeah, go for it.
Just a time check. We have about like 7, 8.
Yep. We are almost done. I'm just going to load some data so you can see. Okay. And now I will go ahead and do that. So here I am in Postgres, right? I'm going to go in and I am going to bring up, thought I had it down here, but I don't. We'll go into my Explorer. It's there. It is. There we go. That's the one I was looking about for. Sorry about that, guys, that it took me a second to find that. Then we're going to do edit, select all, and I'm going to copy it. Just make it easy, right? And I am going to run it on my database. So since I'm doing that, what I can look over here is I can look at my migration tasks and I can see what's happening from a full load perspective, right? So I can see over here on my table statistics, it's tougher to see now as far as just because the screen isn't big. So it kind of things that are happening on the system. But I can go over here and I can see there was my rows, but this here, right? So I can go through and say, what are my inserts that are coming through, right? This had none from before. So I can see all of the inserts and I can see that my change data capture is happening. Okay. So probably 3 more slides. Let's go back to the slide deck and just talk through. There is a way that you can use PG Logical. Okay, so we didn't, if you could tell, we didn't have time to go over that, but you can use that extension. One reason to use PG Logical is on older versions, but you can certainly use newer versions with that. Okay, so again, it's one of those extensions that will help me do that logical replication. One thing you definitely can do if I'm moving from community onto Postgres RDS, okay, without going too much in there, so from a time check. So here's a summary, right? Use PG dump and restore if you, doesn't matter about downtime. It will work for all supported versions, right, and homogeneous. DMS with CDC is on a particular version, and it will work with homogeneous and heterogeneous, and it has that CDC, right, that I can do that change data capture. PG Logical, the extension, I can go 9.6 or higher. That can also be near zero downtime. And then we can do native pub sub with those replication slots. That's what DMS uses to do replication and can have that, again, low downtime. Okay. Best practices. Again, multi-AZ, take that off for especially testing. It just slows things down. For DMS, that size of the server is important. Before you start, ensure all of the parameters are set up, not only for customers, but for me. That's one of the things that I find myself spending time on if I just would have taken time in the beginning and set everything up that you're supposed to set up. test my performance. I can restore the snapshot of the migrated instance, and then use those native tools where it makes sense. Okay. So here's some of the parameters that you can use. Again, we've got a whole document that talks about that, even like for RDS or for on-premise Postgres, what you set up for the PG HBA conf. We've got that written down. Okay. Price estimation, I'll just kind of go through that these are the different things you have to be aware of when you're pricing for RDS. And that's it. So thank you very much for your time, and we can open it up for any questions.
Thanks, Kathy. So I got a few questions. The first is, does DMS support cross-account migration? So you have a source Postgres running on EC2 in one account, then you have an RDS Postgres on another AWS account. Is that supported?
I would have to 100% be sure, because there are things with cross-account and different VPCs that you have to set up, so it's not an easy thing to set up. Yeah, I'd want to double check and make sure. Gowrie, do you know that right off the top of your head?
Yes, yeah, maybe I'll take this question. It is possible, as Kathy pointed out, there are some networking construct you need to set up. There are a couple of ways. You need to have a VPC peering between both accounts. Then you can have DMS to talk to the source and contribute to replication. Or alternatively, you can host your DMS in the DMS supports public accessible option, so you can enable public accessibility. Then DMS IP, so each DMS instance you get an IP. In your target, you can allow access to that IP. So that is also another way you can do this. So technically it's possible, it's just that you need to follow some networking prerequisites before you do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me see if you have any more questions. Yeah, another interesting question. How do you decide the size of the replication instance if you choose to go with the DMS approach? Any tips there, Kathy?
So I don't know of any that are documented like you do step 1, step 2, step 3. I think that for me, the easiest way, even if there's a couple of estimation things you can do, is test it. I think that that, T is not going to work for you in a production environment. So what I usually will do is, what the recommended is that when you do that full load, you use a C class, and a CDC you use an R class, because C is for compute and for CPU, R is for memory. So we found that those are better. But as far as the actual size, again, the best way that I've ever seen is to test it out. Start at, if you know that there's kind of a rule of thumb of a certain, if I'm going between 200 gig or, to, hey, let me just play and start with an extra large, and maybe if I'm going 4 gig, I can do another one. But I'm not aware of an actual document that says, rule of thumb, this much size, use this size of instance. I really feel like the best way is to test it out.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kathy. There's one more question probably which I'll take. Are there any steps to follow when you stop migration? Basically, if you look at the migration, once you set up, the CDC continues to replicate changes from source Postgres to a target RDS instance. And when you decide to cut over, you need to stop your writes. You need to stop your application activity on the source. After that, DMS provides a number of CloudWatch metrics. I think some of this Kathy highlighted. So you can see the latency, how much replication lag that is there currently. DMS emits a lot of CloudWatch metrics. Monitor them. As soon as the replication lag comes to 0, that means all the changes has been applied. Then what you do is you stop the DMS and start the RDS or point your application to connect to the RDS instance. So that is a kind of high-level workflow. In fact, we have a many step-by-step walkthrough which is published under DMS documentation section. I encourage you to kind of refer that.
Yeah, and I also love the blogs. I think we have some really detailed blogs when it talks about using DMS to migrate.
The thing is, because if you are coming from self-managed homogeneous environment, definitely DMS is an option, but you also have, as Kathy pointed out, you could leverage native tools. like logical replication solutions, PG logical extension. You can try those before you go for the DMS approach. So you have a number of options there. Question, what is the source database is an on-premise? Would DMS support that?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So I use EC2. I could have used my laptop to use that as kind of an on-premise. EC2 is just easier for me to create, but I would say most people or most customers that I'm talking to are either migrating from on-premise into RDS, or a lot of people migrate like from EC2 to RDS or to Aurora. But yeah, I would say the majority is going on-premise. You absolutely can set it up for on-premise.
Cool. I think we are about time. Thanks once again for attending today.